To begin today, my colleague Maura Mitchell and I will start by briefly running through the key features of the quality mark and the assessment process. We'll then get some perspectives on their experience from colleagues at two of the institutions who participated in the Greater Manchester Collaborative Project. So to get things underway, I'll now hand over to Moira, the consultant who's worked closely with us on the further development of the quality mark. So over to you now, Moira. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today presenting the quality mark. I noticed, looking through the list of attendees, quite a few names of people I've encountered in one way or another in the sector. So nice to have so many known people here today as well. I'm going to just start with an overview of the framework. It's a bit of a challenge to sort of summarise it in sort of 10-15 minutes, but please, hold your questions as I'm talking and save them, because we've allotted quite a lot of time for questions at the end of the session. I'm not going to say a lot just now about the development of the quality mark. I think suffice to say that it's building probably on the work of a lot of people who are with us today. I'm aware that this is something the sector has really collaborated in developing good practice in this area. And the quality mark is sort of built from the Buttle Trust onwards, with lots of input from NNECL membership, from the Quality Mark Steering Group, which has wide representation on it. And we've had a pilot that was run pre-COVID and a pioneer project in Greater Manchester, which was run during lockdown and has just completed with the successful submission of 7 institutions from Greater Manchester. We had the launch on the 24th of June, and further information can be found about the quality mark and the video from that launch on the NNECL website. So the framework itself then, as we can see here, is essentially in 7 sections. And we've depicted them here as a circle because we see them as very much sort of all interlinked and feeding into each other. And they cover the whole student life cycle. And so sort of we've got pre-arrival, admissions, student wellbeing, student success, but also a real focus on collaboration, on continual improvement, and on culture and leadership. So I'm going to dip into these sections a little bit more as I go through. But I just would like to sort of highlight that, it's very difficult to encapsulate the lived experience of each student in each institution. And so the framework has really been designed to be proportionate and to be able to reflect the context of institutions, both within FE and HE and across the different sort of policy contexts of the UK. So we're bearing in mind, the broad base of institutions who work with care experienced students within the framework. The quality mark, once awarded, lasts for 3 years, and there's a review process at the midpoint of those 3 years. So if we just look at that circle of 7 sections, we can see at the top 3, we've got collaboration, continuous improvement, and culture and leadership. Now, in a sense, they are the sort of key developmental sections of the framework, and they're perhaps the ones that are the most raise the expectations for institutions and offer the highest degree of challenge. The 4 sections in the lower part of that circle, pre-arrival, admissions, student wellbeing and student success, are more really what we think of as the core elements of provision for students and support for students. So I'll just perhaps move on now, Anne-Marie, to the next slide. and have a look at the first two of those sections, culture and leadership and continuous improvement. So if we just sort of take the first sentence there, each of these sections has 3 or 4 criteria statements, which are the key statements that institutions will be assessed against. Well, I'll talk about the rating shortly, but that they need to measure themselves against these statements. So in that first one there, we're looking for evidence of strategic commitment to welcoming and ensuring the success of care experienced students. So with that kind of evidence, we're looking for policy statements, we're looking for how the success of care experienced students is embedded across the various strategies that an institution has. And not only that, but how that is promoted and represented in an accessible way to care experienced students. So just to pick a couple more out of these first 2 sections then, we'll see the third statement in culture and leadership is to do with the definition of what a care experienced student means in your institution and how that's understood throughout the institution. Now, I could talk for 15 minutes and more on this subject alone, but in this part of the quality mark, we're looking for a clearly defined brief of what the institution understands for this cohort, and a consideration of whether that definition is actually working, which students the institution is reaching, and whether that will need to change in future. I think there are a lot of people may be aware that HESA is currently looking at introducing new definitions for care experienced students. So it could be a big boost to the sector as a whole, that we may get these shared definitions which may help us all in this area. So we're hoping for that perhaps in the next academic year. But to move on to another criteria statement there, we've got continuous professional development. And here we're asking not only what professional development do you engage in, but how does your institution think about professional development in a strategic way? So how are you ensuring that this precious time your staff are using to engage in their CPD is actually making a difference to your provision for care experienced students? Continuous improvement is one of the sections that has had the most sort of development, I would say, since the initial pilot of the quality mark. And that development's been shaped by conversations with the Office for Students, and thinking about how the quality mark sits in relation to access and participation plans and the equivalent strategic documents in other parts of the UK. So that first criteria statement there, which I think is the longest criteria statement in the framework, has really been very carefully thought through. Because what we're wanting is to challenge institutions not just to be monitoring care experienced students and their outcomes, but to be thinking about how that evidence is feeding back into provision and how it's informing conversations about where institutions are headed in terms of their provision. So if I just move on to the next slide. Thank you, Anne-Marie. This slide has what we think of as really the core elements of provision, and I'm actually not going to dwell in any length on these criteria statements. Please do, hopefully you may already have had a chance to read through them and pick up on any questions and queries you may have in the Q&A section. But I think they are probably, I wouldn't say the least challenging, because they do contain challenge and stretch within each of those statements, but they're hopefully nothing that would come as any surprise to anyone who's been working on this agenda. So my final slide then, Anne-Marie, is the next one. These are the last two sections of the framework. Student success, again, I think falls into the category of the core elements of provision, although I would perhaps just indicate that there are some areas in there in which we're trying to nudge institutions to think beyond student support to how they're going to begin to incorporate care experienced students into key discussions around the curricula, and how care experienced students are going to be encouraged to develop social capital during their time in higher and further education. And last but not least, collaboration and partnership has actually become an increasingly important section in the framework, particularly, I think, during this period, difficult period of lockdown that we've all been through. Looking at how institutions are working with partners in the sector, and crucially partners from local authorities and regional and national networks to inform their practice and to ensure sort of joined up policies in relation to care experienced students. And in the recent project that I've been involved in Greater Manchester, I was incredibly impressed with the levels of engagement between the higher education institutions and the local authorities in that region. Was very encouraging to see the level of dialogue and sharing of practice, for example, in relation to professional development. And last but not least, I think that our final criteria statement is about effective internal partnerships. And they are obviously crucial to developing a whole institution approach to indeed the NNECL quality mark submission, but more broadly to promoting the success of care experienced students. So in a nutshell, that's the framework. There's so much packed in there, and I'd say a limited time to speak right now, but please save your questions on any of the 25 criteria statements, and we'll pick them up in the Q&A section to come. Back over to you, Patricia. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Moira. I'm just going to take people through the preparation and process side of things. So Anne-Marie, you've already moved on for me, you've preempted me, thank you. So there are a few important first steps to consider before you're embarking on the quality mark process. How much do you know about your care experienced students? Is your institution already collecting data and monitoring the progress and success of these students? How responsive are you to feedback and to making changes based on the evidence? Do you have strategic engagement within your institution for this group of students? For example, is there a member of your senior leadership team who has this as an area of responsibility and is seriously engaged? Obviously, you need to read the guidance document in full and feel that you're reasonably confident that you can meet the criteria. We're not looking for perfection, but we are looking for a satisfactory level of progress within each section. You also want to think about how you'll go about the process. We found, certainly from the work that we've done most recently in Greater Manchester, it is helpful to have some kind of cross-institution working group or small team to work on this with you. Do you have something like that already in place, or are you prepared to set one up as you start to go through the quality mark process? Assuming you feel reasonably comfortable about your readiness, you would then submit the expression of interest form, which is available on our website. We will follow up with an initial conversation with you, covering the points above and also dealing with any queries you may have. We'll also discuss the timescale for the assessment, fitting in with any other commitments or priorities you may have. At that stage, if both parties agree you're ready to go ahead, we'll then match you to an assessor. We'll aim to take account of any relevant particular issues at this stage, plus of course assessor availability. Institutions then need to pay the fee and the assessment process would get underway. So if we could move on now to look at the process. What we've developed is an indicative outline here for the assessment so that both institutions and assessors have a framework to operate within. Central to this are 3 meetings with the assessor to review and work progressively through the different sections of the quality mark. The assessor will be able to give initial feedback on any draft evidence provided and also make suggestions for further improvements or additional evidence which could be included. The first meeting is very much getting to know you, discussing and agreeing that indicative timescale. We're thinking that's most likely to be between 2 to 4 months, setting dates for the 2 further progress meetings, and where relevant, highlighting any particular topics that you want to cover in those meetings. The second and third meetings are opportunities to discuss progress and give feedback on any draft evidence provided, with a particular emphasis for the third meeting around the draft action plan and also confirming a date for the final submission of evidence. Throughout all of this, the NNECL team will also be on hand to provide support for any queries that may arise. While this approach is based on individual institutions going through the process, as Moira's already mentioned, there is the option for groups of institutions to work collaboratively on the quality mark. So you might want to consider that if you're part of an active regional or mission grouping or a federation of colleges, for example. Under the collaborative model, as well as those individual one-to-ones, we also factor in several group sessions as part of the process. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Just continuing here with the process, at the end of the meeting stage, you would submit your evidence for assessment for the quality mark. There's a form to complete, plus you can add links to or copies of any supporting documents or data. A key part of the submission relates to the action plan for the future, and there are sections within the form to capture this information progressively. Once the submission has been made, the assessor will then review the evidence and provide a recommendation to NNECL on the award of the quality mark. At this stage in the development of the quality mark, we are simply awarding it, but there is the possibility for particular sections within it to be rated as enhanced or exceptional. Those ratings are private to institutions, but you may of course want to use them in your own publicity. The recommendation will then be reviewed by one other person within the team for moderation purposes. NNECL will then inform the institution of the outcome of the assessment, including any areas highlighted as enhanced or exceptional practice. We may also ask you to provide us with some brief case studies of examples of those enhanced or exceptional practice areas. And there will also be an annual report on progress by NNECL, which will highlight key trends and learning from the process. Hopefully this part of the webinar has given you some idea of the overall structure and process to be awarded the quality mark. As Moira's already said, we'll be happy to provide further details and answer any questions specifically about those aspects at the end of the presentations. At this point, though, I'm delighted to welcome our 2 institutional speakers, Sophie Fleischman, Student Recruitment and Widening Participation Coordinator at the University of Manchester, and Andrea Neild, Assistant Principal at the Manchester College, both of whom will offer some reflections on their experiences of going through the quality mark. Sophie is going to give her perspective first. So very happy to hand over now to you, Sophie. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Hi, everyone. I was essentially asked 4 questions to sort of outline what our experience has been as an institution. So I'm based at University of Manchester, as you can see from my background here. So 4 questions to really outline how the process was for us. So I decided to just go straight up with an answer of those, no PowerPoint or slides or anything like that. So I think for context, I was in the role of supporting care experience students as a maternity cover for a year. So I started just about as the pandemic was kicking in and we were all moving to working from home, and I finished sort of more in that role more or less on the day that we submitted our quality mark. So it's been really interesting sort of capsule experience of doing the role for me. So moving on to the first question, which was what I found particularly helpful about the process. And as we were part of the GM collaborative submission for the quality mark, one of the most helpful things for me was that we met regularly with other universities. So under Moira's guidance and chairpersonship, we met about every 2 to 3 weeks, and we sort of worked systematically through the sections of the quality mark. So we sort of discuss 1 or 2 sections each week. We'd kind of put in a sort of initial draft of what we were doing by the time of the next meeting, and then we'd move on for the next meeting, looking at the next few sections. That pacing was incredibly helpful. So just having the project plan and timescales that Moira provided was really useful. But I think more importantly was the chance to actually talk those issues through with other people who were going through the process at the same time. So I would really recommend, if you have the chance to do it collaboratively, or even if you're doing it separately, but you can have sort of people who are doing it at the same time of you to discuss that with, it's really helpful. And it's sort of worth kind of noting that the universities, the HEIs who were in that group that we worked with, they're really different in nature, in size, and kind of where the size and shape and demographic of their student body. So it wasn't a case of, oh, we're all doing this, we're all going to put in a very similar quality mark submission. I think we were really different, and we started from different places and we finished at different places. But having that chance to kind of discuss what other people were doing, discuss the challenges, see where you'd approach things similarly, differently, was really useful to do and go through that process. It's great to learn from the benefit of what other people have done. So there were some places where we were just putting in new measures as we went into the quality mark, and other universities are like, oh yeah, we've been doing that, it works really well, or try this thing, this might improve it. That was really helpful. And it's also reassuring to know that there's certain challenges which are pretty universal when you're going through this process. So the one that springs to mind, I'm sure that a few people will be nodding along with this, is the thorny issue of guarantors. So this has been an ongoing thing, sort of how do we tackle this? How do we support our care experience students to sort of not get caught with the really expensive guarantor schemes, or not have to be hit with a massive deposit that kind of puts them on the back foot financially. And going through this process, what we kind of discovered is there is no perfect answer. We're all struggling with this. It's one that really needs to be tackled, maybe by unis, maybe it needs to be a bigger national policy. That's something that came up as well. But sort of going forward, there were some plans in place to kind of try and work collaboratively to put something in place that would support students across Greater Manchester with this issue, rather than kind of trying to do it on a one-by-one, either institutional or individual case basis. It'd be really good, even if it's just a knowledge bank, to how people have approached this in future. So that sort of collaborative working together as you go through the process, even if you start from a different place, you end up in a different place, I think that's still really, really valuable. The next question I was asked was what particular challenges we faced and how we overcame these. And the first one that sprang to mind, really, I don't know if you would call it a challenge so much as a rude awakening. There are some places where we felt like, oh yeah, we've got really solid provision in place here, this is really good. And then you get your feedback from the assessor, and actually maybe you're not doing as well as you thought, or they've framed it in a different way, and you kind of think, oh yeah, actually we've got more to think about here. So the one that comes to mind with me for that one was there's a question around contextual data, contextual admissions, and how you support students in that way. And I sort of got to that section, it's like, oh, brilliant, we've got a good contextual data policy in place. We've just revamped it. It's now more favourable for care experienced students. So that's great. I'll just copy and paste that, stick it in a submission. It'll get a big thumbs up. Fantastic. But actually, when the feedback came through, quite rightly, it was asking for more evidence to show that this was an effective intervention for care experienced students. So our policy gives them a 2-grade differential offer, which means that students can come in with 2 grades lower than the standard course offer. And, you know, there's an obvious concern there that you're making sure that the students who you recruit are academically able to do the course that they've been recruited onto, to set them up for success in their studies. And this was a really great question, and our decision to make that policy was absolutely evidence-based. We know that, broadly speaking, WP students who come in with differential offers or through access schemes do as well as their peers sort of in their final degree. But we hadn't necessarily drilled this down to how this would affect care experienced students specifically, with their specific individual needs and experiences that they're going to become into higher education with. There's some input to put into that into the chat, I don't know, but I think the conclusion that we kind of came to here is that at some point you have to extrapolate that broad data and generate new data to show if this is going to be effective. So that's going to be a kind of working towards in our action plan going forwards. We can look at whether that is a good policy, whether that's working. And in the meantime, that question has really focused us in on making sure that we are supporting students who come in via that route to achieve that success in their degree with additional measures while they're studying with us. So it's not just like, come in on a lower offer, have a good time, see you at the end kind of thing. It's making sure that all that support is really joined together. And I think ultimately, you know, that is the testament to the fact that going through the quality mark process, it's not a box ticking exercise. It is really focused on the individual care experienced students' experiences that they will have when they're going through through the higher education journey. So I think that's, you know, ultimately it's a challenge. It's something that we really had to think about and reassess our approach to, but it was also really valuable kind of bit of feedback to have in shaping what we do next. And then another little challenge, which I'm sure that people will be very familiar with as well, is sort of an ongoing thing, which is about whether your technology can keep up with your plans. So, for example, our student system is not ready to handle data as sensitively as we would like it to for care experienced students. It's a bit all or nothing about who can see what. So that's something that is sort of, as part of a broader revamp of our systems, is something that will need to be considered. But that's kind of frustrating because you know what needs to be done, you just don't have the technology to do it. And that's, I'm sure everybody can kind of identify with that in sort of in the work context. The third question was about how we think that the quality mark will contribute to ongoing improvement and support for care experienced students. And I think that's quite a straightforward one for me to answer, which is that we had lots of individual things that we were doing for students, like lots of people who were really on board and keen to do this work and to make sure these students are supported. And the quality mark just provides a really neat framework for us to do that. It provides you with the, you know, once you've pulled together everything that's actually happening, you can see where the gaps are, where you actually need to link things up, where things can be improved, where things might not be fit for purpose. And it gives you a really clear action plan for focusing your ongoing development there. And sort of, as Moira and Patricia kind of alluded to in or mentioned explicitly in their sections, it really helps with that, getting that buy-in from above, because you need to have that agreement before you can actually go ahead with it. And then once you've sort of laid it all down on paper, it's kind of like, well, we've agreed to this now, so you need to resource it, you need to fund it, we need to do it. And I imagine that most of the people who are here in this session today are really keen to do that. So making sure that that is a strategic priority for your institution is really useful, and that's something that the quality mark provides. And then the final question I was asked was, any final points or tips for other institutions thinking about going through the process? My first one was just really straightforward, just do it. It's a really useful process to go through. I would thoroughly recommend anyone to do it. And point 2, which Patricia also just mentioned in the previous session, is if you don't already have a working group or some kind of group looking at provision for care experienced students, then get on that, set one up as soon as you go into the process. It is really helpful to kind of have that to support you throughout. And that is me. Thanks, everyone.
It's great. Thank you very much, Sophie, for those insights. That's really, really interesting to get your reflections there. Just to add a little note on guarantors, that we are looking at that actually within NNECL now. And any of you NNECL members out there, if you haven't yet completed the survey that we sent out last week, please do so, because we are gathering information at the moment about what's happening in relation to that particular area of work at the moment. So moving on, I'm really delighted now to welcome Andrea Neild from the Manchester College, who's also going to talk about their experience of going through the quality marks. So over to you now, Andrea. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patricia. And I think Sophie really sort of captured that whole sort of experience. So I'm going to touch probably on some of the similarities around, what Sophie was commenting on. I don't know if you could just move on. Probably a couple of slides. Just want to talk about what that really was around gaining that whole, what it's meant to us as an organisation and what it's meant to our students. So just to put a little bit of context, we were, as an FE college, we span across the city with 10 campuses, and we have a large provision that includes looked after young people and care leavers from 28 different local authorities, which is quite unique for an FE college to have such numbers, and particularly when we were working with our other partners, other FE colleges within Greater Manchester. We were quite highly populated in terms of those young people, and we'd already, because of that that volume of learners, we were already reviewing our structures and our processes and how we were reporting on our KPIs to our governing body through the governance structure and our senior leadership team. So we were already beginning to review that, and we became involved with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who had, who really made a statement about that commitment to care leavers through the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and the Care Leavers Covenant. And as you can see, they're doing things differently in Manchester for, Greater Manchester for care leavers there, a number of events that were starting to gain momentum that we were managing to sort of hook up with and link into. And that really gave us that opportunity. Before we even went for the quality mark, we had already started to partner with other Greater Manchester colleges to act as critical friends in a two-way process, being very open and honest about, our processes and what we were doing. And we'd started to do that sort of mini audit in our own way, not necessarily in a focused way, as the NNECL submission allowed us to do later on. And it was gaining momentum and getting that recognition. And as part of that, we were then involved in the development of the quality mark as an FE college, although we are an FE college with a HE provision as well. So that just really puts into context where we were and what we were doing. So we'd already started to do that piece of work. And as Sophie said, you think you've got some policies in place and you think you have a procedure and you've got the buy-in, but actually it's the so what factor that really is important, and that was part of the process that we went through the submission. If we could just move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the whole sort of NNECL process, really, as a set of GM colleges and the universities, we had a number of meetings to discuss and agree our timeline and how that was going to look and feel, what the processes were going to be. And we were really well supported by the NNECL team to do that review and to involve others from outside the organisation, but really importantly, that student voice to support the evidence. I think somebody put in the chat before, how are you, what evidence are you using to, show that you have collaborative partnerships, or, that you are including the student voice. And that was a really key and important aspect for us within our submission. And it was something that we thought we'd actually got missing. So we thought, yes, we've got this particular policy, and we're raising awareness, and we're reporting on our data, and we think we're looking at the right data, and we think that we used, we've got that information. But where was the full cycle in that? So how are we closing the loop? Was it specific enough and tailored enough for this particular group of students? And we were looking at this alongside lots of other groups of students as part of our inclusion and diversity and widening participation approach. So it wasn't just our care leavers that we were looking at, it went through the organisation. So is the support tailored? Is it having the impact? The so what? You've got a policy, so what does that mean on the ground to that individual student? I think as well, we were really thinking about what the benefits would be for us as an organisation, to be able to demonstrate that this is the work that we are doing. So it was really, our partners that we work with, our local authority, the combined authority, virtual schools that we were working with, right the way through to personal advisors and the young people themselves, about raising that organisation that we are looking at this and we're really serious about this, and we are really serious about this making a difference. It wasn't lip service, just to get that accreditation. It really was unpicking and unraveling everything that we did and looking at it through the lens of that young, person, that care experienced young person. So it's about that lived experience. So not just, yes, we can tick a box that we have a policy. What does that mean? And then also, do all of our policies actually interlink? So thinking about, everything that you do as an organisation, does that have, has there been an overview in terms of how that impacts a care leaver? So it was a really detailed process. I think we started off thinking it was going to be one thing, and then it grew into something much bigger, but actually has been so beneficial to all groups of students, not just our care leaver students. And I think really key involving those students in the review of that learner journey, so getting that specific voice, and so making improvements along the way and sharing that with the group of students and getting their feedback. So not just putting something in, we didn't just put something in place, we actually constantly reviewing and really built that into our full processes. Working with really key affinity groups of students who could provide that feedback to us, and having a formalised way of doing that. Again, working really collaboratively, as Patricia and Moira mentioned, working collaboratively with the other universities, with the other colleges, with the local authority, with GM Hire, but also making sure that we are joining up, as I said, all of those policies and procedures, so they don't sit within separate departments, but we actually look at them and join them up and think about that learner journey. So again, the whole process of that submission form and reviewing that cycle really enabled and gave us the drive to be able to do that and to get everything on the table for a discussion. And as I said, it's meant us working with other organisations, and so we've actually looking at and we have commissioned some groups to work with us again as another sort of critical friend level. So we've been working with Diversity UK, and we're looking at the trauma informed piece of work, so that we can have that embedded into the culture of the organisation, and we are aiming to be a trauma informed organisation in the next 2 years to have that status. And this has really been the drive for that at a strategic level. And I think some of the challenges that we had, time, resources and the evidence, very much as sort of echoing what Sophie was saying. For us, we started off thinking we were doing one thing, and then it's escalated into lots of other things, because it's opened our eyes and our awareness about some of our processes, and the fact that we needed to be more critical internally to ourselves. So that's been a great process. I think providing some of that evidence, we thought anecdotally that we had this in place. Oh yes, such a body does such a thing, and we're doing this. But actually, how do you evidence this, and then what does that mean to the students? So where's the learner voice? Where's the student's voice in all of this process? And really, highlighting that. And it's meant us looking at every aspect of that sort of, not just the strategic cycle, but then the operational aspects. So looking at what we do around our transition and how we can really improve that, both transition into college and then the progression and the exit, and how we support that out onto university and beyond. So really, again, tying that whole loop and that life cycle. So I think really that's just to echo really what Sophie was saying. Our experience, again, very different because we're an FE college with a small HE provision. But by doing this whole process, we have got those similarities in place, and it's about sharing and learning from each other as much as yourself, and being able to be open and honest, and not being afraid to admit when things are not quite right, but then working with others to sort of put things in place to make sure that you take things forward. So it's been a great process. My final slide, I think, just has a quote, I think, from one of our students. So it's really raised their awareness and their understanding of the processes, and they've really been key to what we've been doing, having that student voice in there, and really questioning and asking us and being part of that critical friendship group, and them understanding that yes, we are taking this seriously, and the improvements that we're putting in, we do measure that, get back to them and close that loop. So it's been a great process. I think if you think that you haven't got things in place now, that's probably correct, because we thought, because we had a large number of these, of students who were care experienced, we thought, we've got processes in place, we've got procedures, we've got policies, but it's only when you start to really unpick under that first level that you start to discover that actually, yes, you can do things better. And so if you think, I haven't got everything in place, don't worry about that. It really is a key driver to be able to implement lots of change. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
That's great, Andrea. Thanks very much for that. I think particularly kind of highlighting the way in which you brought the student voice into the process is a really, important and valuable part of the overall approach. So thanks very much for that. We've come to the end of the presentation, so it's now over for the Q&A session, and our NNECL co-chair, Aaron Pyle, is going to chair this session with contributions from each of the speakers now. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. As Patricia said, my name's Aaron. Not only am I chair of the Board of Trustees, but I'm also been through this process because obviously I work at the University of Salford, which is a Greater Manchester University, so we were part of the process as well, which was a really interesting thing. So but I'm trying not to answer questions. We have got questions actually, which means that the panel won't have to put up my really, really hard questions I was going to ask, because there's questions that you've asked. So we'd always have an alternative just in case. I think one of the first questions here that's been asked a few times in both the QEA and the chat is around if you're not ready for the, if you're looking at the questions and the criteria and you don't think you're ready, is it still worth applying, doing your submission of interest for the quality mark? Do you have to have everything ready and to go when you actually apply? So I'll ask that first to Moira, probably.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. It's a very good question, and one that we've had a lot of discussion about. The original pilot of the quality mark used a RAG rating, red, amber, green. And we made a conscious decision to move away from that because we wanted it to be a positive experience. We didn't want it to be an experience of failure for institutions. So we're not really wanting institutions to start completing the submission form unless we're reasonably confident that it's going to be a successful application. But what we've done is we've ensured that that the key building blocks will be in place through having a robust sort of pre-application process, if you like. So as Patricia's indicated, we invite expressions of interest, and they are followed with an initial discussion with NNECL that will essentially evaluate where you are. Now that conversation might end in NNECL saying, right, we think you need to go away and get, you know, these 2 further building blocks in place before you start your submission. Or might be, actually, no, you can do that as part of the process, and we think you're ready to start now. And as our speakers from institutions have said, it is also, you know, that this is a developmental process. This is not just about getting a badge, it's about actually changing things, and the process itself changes things. So it might be that, you know, you think you're in one place, but actually through the process you realise you're somewhere else. So there is, you know, the developmental element of the process itself, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Maura. I can just add to that. We went, because in greater measure we went through this, and one of the things was about policy. Not many universities have a specific policy on care leavers, but then there's ways you can do that. You can work towards that. And in fact, as a group, with Maura's help, we developed a policy statement that could be used for all universities. So until the such time when you're ready to do that, and that's part of your action plan. So you don't have to have everything there straight away to apply,
no.
But you do have thought about how it's going to move forward. Sophie, do you want to ask, do you want to add anything to that?
I think, sorry, Aaron, where do you want me to come in on that one?
Yeah, just add anything to add around taking part in the process and about not having everything there in place. I know you've said it before, Sophie.
I popped it in the chat, but I think I sort of skimmed a few of the questions, and I think there's very much a kind of, it varies depending on where you're at in terms of your provision for care leavers, and also what your structures are. So ours had kind of quite recently changed. We had more staff involved in supporting care leavers as sort of a defined part of their role. And so in that respect, I think maybe we're a little, we had the advantage of the fact that there was a commitment that staff were going to be putting their time in there, but it also meant that there was quite a lot of changes in what we were going to do. So it meant that a lot of our plans had not come into action or not come to fruition just yet. So I think that potentially if you're at the very beginning, you don't really know who your care experience cohort are yet, and things like that, it would be quite challenging to then start filling out all these other sections. But I think in our case, the University of Manchester's case, I think we sort of have this overarching commitment to widening participation, but it's sort of at a policy level, not huge sections of it were specifically directed towards care experience students in terms of, defined objectives or things that we were trying to do. We had really good support for sort of the transition in, or the application side of things, and then our student support side of things, actually once students have arrived, was still very much developing. So I think if you're sort of strong in one area and you're trying to build the rest around it, I think definitely, sort of have the conversation and go for it. But I think it is definitely a good move to kind of critically analyze where you're at before going into it and where you hope to be as you come out of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. Well, we'll move on because we haven't got that much time and we've got quite a lot of questions here. Question about grading. How are the 7 areas graded? So this is about for you, Maura. Will a provider be graded on their position in each area, and how will you know progress is being made?
Yes, thanks. So we've got 3 ratings for each section, and they are satisfactory, enhanced and exceptional. And we didn't want this to become a competition about, we're very aware of, charter marks like Athena Swan with the gold, silver, bronze, and this is this work is about a relatively small cohort of students in the sector, and we needed to be sure that this quality mark was a pragmatic tool that would work alongside access and participation statements and would basically change things on the ground. So we didn't want to get too navel-gazing about levels and standards, but at the same time we wanted a robust system for assessment. So we've got these criteria that apply to the sections, and as Patricia said earlier, they're not going to be publicised. So in terms of the institution, you will get the quality mark or you won't, and that information about the grading will be for your internal use, which you can of course publicise if you want to, if you've done particularly well in a particular area. In terms of how we do that grading, of course, in NNECL, that's based on the evidence base that we have across the sector. And we haven't had time yet to talk about the assessors that we have in NNECL for doing the work. And, I guess this conversation may generate more questions in some of you, in which case do come back to Patricia and myself with any of those questions. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Patricia, about the rating. Sorry, Aaron.
Yeah.
Well, really, I just echo what you've already said, Moira. That we're not seeking to make it into some kind of competitive framework. It's very much about the individual institution and the context in which they're operating. But obviously, we want to be assured that we think the provision is at a satisfactory level across all of those 7 areas, and that's the really fundamental issue, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. Just a couple of very quick questions here. Someone's asked, when will you see the application form? Is it after submitting interest? I think Moira or Patricia, do you want to ask that quickly?
We've been sending out the submission form as we've had a number of institutions starting to express interest. And once we've had that initial conversation, we have been sending the form out. I don't think it's particularly, something that we should only keep for that aspect of the process. So, I mean, it's something we could put into the quality mark section of the website so people can see it. It is designed to be hopefully quite user-friendly and not too onerous, to actually complete.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Next question is about how well you know your data. Will the quality mark expect the provider to provide care leaver care experience data on continuation rates, success and completion rates? Do you need that data before you submit? So again, Moira.
Yeah, I think what we did in Greater Manchester was we took the sections of all the institutions' access and participation plans and looked at the data therein. And actually, to begin with, that was quite a low starting point. I mean, bearing in mind the plans had probably been written some time ago and data is improving, hopefully, all the time for most institutions. So I think we wouldn't necessarily say, yes, you have to have all of those measures in place before you can think about submitting. But we would want you to, be aware of, to understand if you're unable to produce the data, why you're unable to produce it, how this fits into your bigger strategy for student success and retention across the board anyway. We do recognise there are particular challenges around gathering this data. There's been a lot of misunderstandings about what the question means on the UCAS form and so forth. And actually one of NNECL's trustees is currently involved in a piece of research around that. And I think what we'll find, all of us, is that the sector is really tightening up around this. Aaron's been involved in a working group on that as well. And so I think we're going to be helped by things that are going on nationally. But I would also just like to sort of slip in there. I know somebody else has been asking about student voice, and that's very, very important. So for evidence, when you're talking about very small cohorts and you don't necessarily have statistically significant data anyway, the qualitative piece is also very important here. So consultation with groups and getting regular feedback on provision as built into your sort of ways of doing things is also very important. So it's not just the quantitative data.
Thank you for that. A question here about, as a small provider who is new in the area of care experienced students, would the process be the same as a larger HE provider? And do you have a grooming or support process for newcomers? Patricia, I'll put that one to you.
A bit worried about the grooming process. I think one of the things we've tried to do with the framework is to make it so that, whatever type of institution you are, whether you're a smaller provider or a larger provider with a lot of, or relatively large number of care experienced students, there are ways that you can demonstrate your practice against the criteria as we've drafted them. So as a smaller institution, let me generalize, you might feel you don't have as much resource to put into this area. You perhaps don't have as generous a bursary for care leavers or care experienced students. But what you may have is actually really good personalized understanding of who those students are because of the scale of your institution, which would be something a much bigger institution might struggle to do. So there are going to be pros and cons, for different types of institutions, I think, around the criteria. We're always happy to talk to any institution that is thinking about the possibility of participating, even if they want to kind of, take a bit of time subsequently to reflect on when they want to go ahead. If you're not a NNECL member, I can put in a plug for membership, because that's also another way to network with other practitioners and find out what other institutions are doing. And that's also, that would also be a support, I think, for newcomers.
Thanks, Patricia. I'll ask this question to the two institutions because I'm sure this is something that everyone wants to know. What sort of staff time allocation would you say is needed to go through the process, e.g. per week? Andrea, do you want to answer that?
Oh gosh, I don't know whether we quantified this in any way. I think what we did is we've obviously built this into our other processes, and as I mentioned, we've expanded and not just looked at the care leaver, and we've sort of widened that out, and so it's now part of our sort of our EDI groups and our strategy groups. So it's an included agenda item at a variety of meetings. But in terms of the sort of on the ground meetings with students and the sort of and that type of work, we have actually allocated one of our a particular member of staff in the support team to have that overarching view with a manager as well supporting that. But I think although that might sound like a large resource, that is having a massive amount of impact in how we're driving that forward and how we're taking improvements. And as I say, that other groups of students benefit from the from the strategies and the processes and the procedures that we're putting in place. So it is it is having a massive impact for those students. So couldn't be hard to quantify it, but we have allocated resource, and that's because we really have seen this as a key strategic importance to us as an organisation, particularly as we're looking at becoming a trauma-informed city. So Manchester looking at becoming trauma-informed, and so this is a key piece of work for us that's going to go across the whole organisation at every level, right from governance right the way through to facility staff as well. So yeah, we've got that buy-in, but I think this process kick-started that. So the commitment from senior leadership to buy into this process and to support this process has had massive benefits across. So hopefully that
Sophie, that's great. Sophie, do you want to add anything to that at all?
Oh, Sophie, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry, classic Zoom error. Yeah, I think as Andrew said, it's incredibly difficult to quantify. I would say that we have 3 members of staff who sort of a significant part of their daily role is sort of going towards supporting care experience students in a variety of ways. And this would mean that the kind of things like generating and gathering certain bits of data and feedback and things like that are already encompassed in their role. So I don't know if, you know, they gather that information for various committees and bits of feedback throughout the year. So it's, you know, I don't know whether you specifically put it into the quality mark side of things. I probably spent a good half a day a week making sure that the sort of actually filling in submission, running it by the various people in the working group who needed to see it, making sure it was cascaded to wherever it needed to go for the, was it 6-8 week period that the project plan covered, maybe 9 weeks. So it was during the submission, it was a significant portion of my time went into doing that bit, but it all feeds into broader work that's going on and how available that data is and whether there are people whose job it is to generate that in the first place already.
Thanks, Sophie. Can I just check how much time we've got, Patricia? What you're there?
I think we've run out of time, unfortunately.
Well, what I'd say is there's still more questions here, but what Sian will do, Nick will put these questions together and with answers, because there's some questions particularly around Scotland and things like that. So we'll put the answers together and send them out to you. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's just what I was going to say as well, that we'll respond to all of those and send those out to participants today. Just to conclude with a final thank you for everyone who's attended today, and particularly to the speakers, especially Sophie and Andrea, for sharing their experiences, as well as the questions that we'll respond to. If you've got any other queries, want to have a chat with us about it, do please get in touch at info@necl.org, and we hope that we'll have the opportunity to work with many of you over the coming months as we roll out the quality mark. Thank you all very much. Bye.